Hello, YouTube. Alan Barr from alanandbarr.com, internal tools product manager. And today, what I'm here to help you with, help you understand, is how to write great documentation for your software projects using the 4 types of software documentation. Now, you might be asking yourself, what is this all about? Why do I need to care about it? Well, the reason why is if you're writing software, it's not always clear how to use it, and you want your users to be successful. The problem that you run into is that who's supposed to write this stuff? Who am I depending on? What are we supposed to write? All of those questions are very difficult, and unless you have a lot of experience, you've been on enough software projects, it's really helpful to have a clear idea of what to focus on and what not to focus on. Otherwise, you're going to be writing first drafts, your own learnings, you publish those out, and then people read them, they get confused, and it's a bad time for everybody. So let's not do that. Let's use this tool. It's called the 4 types of software documentation. It's a phenomenal model. There's an image. If you go to the website, I'll provide a link. There will be a axis, and on that axis is the delineation of what's the documentation for. Is it for studying and learning? Is it about theoretical knowledge, or is it about practical knowledge, and is it about applying, working through the material? So it's an awesome axis. You can see on Daniel Procita's website. He's the one that came up with this user documentation framework. It's fantastic. I really recommend checking it out. Now, you might be like me, where before knowing about this mental model of documentation, you had some indications. You've been on enough projects where you were like, well, if it's going to change in a couple weeks, we probably shouldn't write it down. It's probably not worth our time. Or maybe you have some other ideas of like, well, is someone going to be coming away confused if they read this? Is it still going to be true after some time passes? Is this really beneficial for people to know? Do they care? Is this just how we do it and not how they're going to care about doing it? Do they know? Do they want to know? All those things. It wasn't the most practical. It wasn't really helping me have the right conversations with my team. They would, struggle to understand, like, so I'm supposed to do it this way or not this way. They're not writers by trade. The projects that we work on are small enough that it doesn't make sense to have a technical writer on staff to do these things. So we're really trying to make things that are valuable, help people understand how to use them, but also be mindful that the time and the time it takes to maintain these things is also a lot. It's challenging. And over time, it can just kind of get out of date and become a huge waste of time. So the benefit of this 4 types of documentation model is that you can focus on what's going to really empower your users to be effective and productive in how they do things. So there are 4 types. Those are tutorials, how-tos, reference, and explanation. Let me get into what tutorials are first. I think that tutorials, as a person working in software, are the most beneficial and effective way to learn how to use a new tool. The reason why is they're linear. They start from the beginning to the end of knowing nothing to achieving a problem. So you get that dopamine hit of fixing something. And then also software engineers are used to reading people's random blogs on the internet and finding a tutorial to do a thing so that they can just upskill, so that they can get familiar with using a new tool or technique. I randomly stumbled upon this whole framework when I was browsing the Knative documentation because I myself needed to learn some new material, understand how Knative works with Kubernetes, and I was able to learn about this new awesome way of thinking of documentation. So tutorials, hugely beneficial. Daniel Procita really cautions, though, that they're the most expensive and most challenging to write and maintain. You really need to understand the person that's going to be onboarding, what do they know about the product, the things that they need to know just to be effective, to start. And then as time changes, as the product changes, keeping that up to date and useful, enabling the users to highlight and tell you if there's some problem with that or giving them the opportunity to update that themselves could really save you a ton of time. So tutorials are huge. I love them. I couldn't live without them. I write a lot of them, and I worry how much I'll have to maintain them. Next is how-tos. How-tos are also beneficial. The main challenge with those is they're much more specific to a certain kinds of issue. So in the website, and I'll link this, Daniel Procita compares the difference between a recipe and then like a cookbook. So a cookbook could be walking you through the whole cooking process and how you use the recipe to do certain things and then finally achieving the meal. With the how-to, it's more like the recipe of like, do you have a chicken? Would you like to cook the chicken? This is how you cook a chicken. So when I think of software projects and how that would apply to them, I'm thinking about, okay, what do I need to know or ask for to be effective at doing something? So I need to know that Kubernetes uses containers or pods. Then I can do a how-to about doing something with configuring them. If I'm completely, fresh, I have no idea of what Kubernetes even is, the how-to is not going to be helpful to any of those people. So it's not beneficial to certain kinds of people that do not know anything. But once they do know something, they're on board, they understand more of the ecosystem, then those become very beneficial as workarounds or ways to work through a challenge that might be common and is not really going to be fixed by software. So there's two other types of documentation. Those are the reference and explanations. So when I think of reference, I think of like the API documentation that comes with code. It's really just telling you like what does it take in, what does it put out, what are the inputs, what are the outputs, how do you configure it, what do you need to do. There isn't really any additional information about why would I do this with a reference, documentation. It's very plain. It's very engineering focused. It's very practical. And so those are really good. They're just not really often useful to the end users. So they might be great for the team. Maybe if you're publishing a library to others, it's going to be good. But for the most part, it's a mixed bag. Explanations, those are incredibly valuable, but I wouldn't ask my team to create them from scratch, especially if it's a big system that isn't something that they invented on their own, if they're leveraging. So I would defer and leverage a lot of the external internet resources of people that, they want a career as explaining these really complicated technical tools. And if I really wanted to, then maybe I'd consider, hiring a technical trainer to focus on writing more explainers. If there's something in the software that my team is building that really mandates understanding how it works, it could be valuable. I do see a lot of value in explainers, especially around, let's say, Kubernetes networking. How does it work? I'd love to see some graphics, some visuals, but it takes a lot of time and effort to make those kinds of things. And if you're on a software project where you have a goal to hit, it may not be part of the whole initiative. So just something to consider. I highly recommend leveraging this as a technique to work through what kind of documentations you need to provide your users, how to keep them up to date, when to maintain them, when not to even do or focus on. Context matters hugely for people when they're learning. They need to have all the right information next to other things that will benefit them. It's just how we work. The presentation of things is almost as important as the actual content itself. It's something we constantly struggle with, is just where does this need to go? How does it fit? How does it link back to the other things? It's just another thing to maintain, unfortunately, but it's just part of the cost of doing business. So try to focus more on tutorials, get input and feedback from people, what's working well, what's not. Make sure you continue to modify, update, fix, your documentation, and start with these 4 types. I think they're really going to be huge for you in writing really good, helpful content. So what do you think? Is documentation worthwhile? When is it not worthwhile? Where does this break down? Do you have some experiences? Share them in the comments.